and welcome to Pint of Science, coming live to you from the city of Lincoln. My name's Kay Ritchie, and I'm the local Lincoln City coordinator for Pint of Science, and I'm going to be our host for today's show and our other shows on Tuesday and on Thursday. So we've got lots of opportunities for you to get in touch with us, and you can do that by typing into the comments underneath the YouTube video. So we'll be able to bring your comments up on the screen and have a little chat with you that way. So if you'd like to tell us where you're joining us from and perhaps what you're drinking, that'd be lovely. We'd like to know. And you can use that chat function in the comments underneath the YouTube channel to ask questions of our speakers. So what we're going to do today is have two talks from Jose Gonzalez-Rodriguez and Bonaventura Majolo. And in between each of their talks, there will be opportunities for you to ask questions, and we'll also have a chat about our creative reactions, which are our science-inspired artworks. While I'm waiting to see where you're joining us from in the chat, I'd like to take this opportunity to give a big shout out to my colleague and friend, Dr. Tessa Flack, who's operating everything in the background and producing today's show to make sure everything runs smoothly. So if we've got some answers from people, I'd love to know where you're joining us from. Let's see what people have to say. Erica joining us from Brazil. Wow, that's far away from Lincoln in the East Midlands of England. Welcome. And you're from Edinburgh. I'm sorry, I can't pronounce your name, but Edinburgh is a fantastic city. You can tell by my accent that I'm a little bit biased there. Switzerland. Wow, this is fantastic. I really didn't think we'd get so many people from all over the place. And Rebecca's joining us from West Yorkshire. Great, Rebecca. We're going to be talking about you a little later, I think. And Peter from Norwich. Hi, Peter. Thanks for joining us. So as I said before, you can use that comments function to ask some questions of our speakers. And you can also interact with Pint of Science on social media using @PintOfScience and the hashtag #Pint21. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome our first speaker, Jose Gonzalez-Rodriguez from the School of Chemistry at the University of Lincoln. Hi, Jose, welcome. How are you today?
Yeah, not bad, thank you.
Good, excellent. Now, you can see I'm wearing my Pint of Science t-shirt, but you've got a pretty topical t-shirt. Can we have a look?
I have my heavy metals one, so...
Oh, that's awesome. Thank you, Jose. Okay, well, I'll just leave it over to you then to tell us all about recycling metals.
Okay, so thank you for hosting me. I'm going to talk about the recycling of bioavailable metals, as you can see on my title. And before I say anything else, I'm going to give you basically a little bit of introduction with that little video. So I'll shush.
Earth is the only planet in the known universe where life is thriving. Preserving life, our environment, and the balance in our atmospheric phenomena are key for our survival as species, but also to maintain peace and economic growth. Our lifestyle is frantic. We have conquered every corner of the planet, and we keep transforming it. Our industrial development has made it possible for us to live a comfortable life, expanding our lifespan and making it possible for us to explore beyond our planet and develop our culture. To keep this expansion, and to maintain our lifestyle, we need resources. We look for them everywhere. We mine the Earth's surface, but also we have gone underwater to obtain these valuable resources to meet our industrial needs. However, our development is altering our ecosystem, and in the process, we produce huge amount of residues that we do not know how to eliminate or recycle. Some of this waste still contains valuable components that are very scarce. Despite its value, we do not use them because we do not have the technology or the know-how to bring them back into our industries. Some of these materials are difficult to recycle, and they are dispersed in our waste. However, scientists at the University of Lincoln, led by Dr. Jose Gonzalez-Rodriguez, in collaboration with an engineering company, GSA Environmental, have developed ways to recycle them using smart materials designed to trap them. These smart materials represents a step forward to help recycling many of these valuable components, and a step forward in the right direction, towards a brighter and cleaner future.
So, yeah, you are now a little bit more aware of the problem. As you can see on my screen and your screen now, so actually you know that we basically we are producing waste. We not just because as a consumer basically we throw what we don't need, but also because, as we said before, we are actually needing resources and we mine the earth. And it's funny because when you look at statistics, that they give you a little bit of a good hint of what is the size of the problem. So if you take into account just the European Union, 2018, 74% of the waste we generated in the EU actually is mineral waste. So some sort of concrete material or even rock, or that is basically 74% of 5.2 tons, 5,200 kilos per inhabitant in Europe. So another part is if you look at the electronics we generate. I mean, if you think that humanity is expected to produce 120 million tons of electronic waste by 2050, I mean, now we produce 50 million tons. So again, it's shocking how much of this waste we are generating. So a little bit of, just a little bit more of statistics to put things in context. You look at the 74% I was talking before. Mining, construction, basically are the main sectors that actually influence that production of waste. And if you look at us, households, 8.2%. So actually, we are not, our house is actually polluting. Is basically we are producing waste, but our industries actually also produce waste. So sounds very negative, but actually I don't want to be negative. I want to be positive. Why? Because if you look at the trend, and that's what you have on the screen now, from 2004 to basically 2018, that's the statistics we have at the moment. Actually, there is a trend in dropping the amount of waste we are producing. Not in everything. I mean, we still consume a lot of water, and that is a problem for the future generations. We are hungry of water, but that's a different talk. But yeah, you see that we are actually not bad in terms of reducing the amount of waste we are generating. But still, basically, there is, I mean, if you look again at the statistics for the European Union, 2018, we were recycling more or less 55% of everything that we were producing, but still 45% that we don't recycle. And that 45% ends in landfills or incinerated or disposed in any other way that sometimes are illegal. So just let's go to what is the value in the waste we generate, because that's the title of my talk, is let's waste our rubbish. So if you look at electronic waste, I mean, mobile phones, I mean, we have plenty of them. I mean, many of us basically have 2 or 3, depending on and then sometimes they end in a drawer and nobody knows basically they stay there forever, or we basically throw them. But actually, there is 100 times more gold in 1,000 kilos of electronic waste that you can find in 1,000 kilos of basically gold ore, the mineral. So actually, that is shocking, because we could actually mine that resource that is still there. So again, let's put numbers and money into this electronic waste. So the metals contained in this electronic waste are worth $62 billion. I mean, that is 3 times the annual production of all the silver mines in the world. So that tells you that there is some resource there we could actually, or we need to exploit. Then, if you look at the amount we produce, I mean, I'm going to give figures from the UK. In 2016, our electronic waste generation was 25 kilos of electronic waste. That's shocking. I mean, especially if you compare with the average of the world, which is basically 6 kilos. So obviously, we are a hungry nation in terms of resources for electronic components. Not that bad, because if you look at actually our recycling capabilities, I mean, and looking to the UK in the context of Europe, actually 67% of that electronic waste is actually recycled. And then you can see how other countries compare to what the UK is doing at the moment. So the other part I'm going to actually talk, because gold, silver, I mean, those are typical metals people actually find valuable. But another elements that are very important for us at the moment are rare earths, and some of you may know, but others may not. So actually, typical thing we do when we don't know something, hey Google. So actually, if you type why rare earths are important, they will tell you what rare earths are. So they are basically elements that are important for high-tech devices, but also for defense and clean energy production. So other metals that are also interesting we are interested in is especially one, rhenium. Again, hey Google, why is the element rhenium so important? And Google will come back to you to say rhenium is a very resilient material. It's actually used to produce superalloys that are going to be so critical for the production of basically materials that are going to be in turbines or basically high demand conditions, high pressure, high temperature. So they look pretty because, I mean, if you look at the way they look like, I mean, rhenium, yttrium, scandium, basically they are rare earths, and they are actually quite difficult to extract. Why? Because as you can see on a screen in the red part, they are actually extracted from subproducts or tails of other metals. So actually the concentration of those minerals in the ore is going to be very, very small. And that's why we need to find ways to actually do it in a way that it could be actually productive. That's where we come into this equation. That's where the people here in Lincoln, we have been playing with computers and smart materials. And what we've been doing is designing these materials to trap or specifically basically enclose yttrium, rhenium, other components. So, for example, one part of our research was actually getting those scrap metals that you can see on the screen, and that is actually that metal is CMS64, which is a superalloy that you can use in turbines of planes or basically other turbines, and we dissolve them. But then you need to extract the rhenium. The rhenium is the real valuable metal. I mean, just to give you an idea, a kilo of rhenium, I know it's a little bit cheaper, but not a long time ago was 10,000 pounds per kilo. So actually it's more valuable than gold. So what we did is creating these materials that you can see on a screen. And these materials basically are synthesized according to what the computer models that we generate basically tells us we should use. And by doing that, we are going to actually selectively trap in rhenium. We have designed some materials for scandium, for yttrium, and now basically we are basically ready to exploit them and try to make them into industry, so industry can use them. And then we can, by doing this, we can stop mining the earth and start mining our rubbish. So that's all for me, sorry. And thank you for listening. And if you have any questions, I'm going to be very happy to answer any questions you may have. Thank you very much.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Jose. I had no idea that my drawer full of sort of old mobile phones and bits of electronic equipment could actually be my road to future riches. So it's really interesting.
Yeah.
Well, hopefully we'll get some questions from our listeners and our viewers, but I'd like to kick things off, if I can be selfish, and ask a question of my own.
Mm-hmm.
Your techniques for trapping the elements, is that the kind of thing that we could see scaled up to our local recycling plants, or does that have to be a sort of quite specialist production site that would use those techniques?
I mean, the technology itself can be tailored to any metals that you want. I mean, so if we go to the recycling plant and then they have, for example, any valuables or any elements that we want to trap, the only thing we need to know is what is the chemical form. And then we can actually get that chemical form into our computer, and then we can design these materials to trap those. So that's the way it's working. So in all fairness, basically, we can trap almost anything. But again, I'm a little bit, not almost anything, but nearly.
Okay, so in theory, then we could see that being used at the local recycling plants in the future.
Sorry, could you repeat?
Yeah, sorry. So we might be able to see that sort of technology being used at our local recycling plants in future.
I mean, to be honest, there are companies already using this technology in New Zealand, basically in Sweden. So it's something that is coming. So we're just basically using the technology to target specific materials that might be high tech or maybe strategic to governments or basically,
Okay, brilliant. So we've got some questions here. Paul Elliott is asking, how do you think we can encourage governments to invest more in this important area of research?
I think that the strategic nature of these materials is actually making governments to invest. I mean, if you look at yttrium or scandium, they are very localized in China, or some mines are in Brazil. When you go to actually, you look at the importance of these materials to actually design engines that are going to withstand high pressures, high temperature, governments will be more prone to actually recycle what we have. So I know that some companies actually are not throwing these engines away. They're actually just keeping them till the technology allows them to recycle these metals in a proper way. So
that's very future forward. That's excellent.
Yeah.
Okay, Carlos is asking, that's really cool. Well, that's a comment, but I think that's really cool as well, Carlos. I'm in agreement. So what are the requirements that you look for in MD? Is that machine design?
It's molecular dynamics.
Molecular dynamics, there you go. See, this is why you're the expert and I'm not. So what are the requirements that you look for in molecular dynamics to design those trapping compounds?
It's basically what we are trying to do is create the environment. And I mean, we do these calculations in a very simplistic way. So we don't try to use, when you do these calculations, you can use solvent. We do it in vacuum. And we try to actually use computers in a way that screen the best materials or the best raw materials for these polymers, these basically smart materials. But obviously, we as a chemist, we actually look at the chemistry and the best synthetic route. So that's the way we do it, really.
Okay, brilliant. I hope that answers Carlos's question. And Patrick's asking, are rare earths infinitely recyclable, or do they diminish over time?
Rare earths could be technically the atoms or the elements are not going to die out. So actually, that is the way we need to do it. If you look, rhenium is not a rare earth, but it's very valuable. We only have 10,000 tons in the planet. In the moment that's gone, then we cannot basically produce high performance engines. So how are we going to have more jets? How are we going to have rockets that are going to go to Mars and do all these things we want to do? Until basically we start mining the asteroids, but then I don't think I will see that happening. But yeah, we need to actually recycle what we have in this planet. So technically, yes, we could recycle again and again. That's what the concept of circular economy is about, is we don't throw anything away. We actually create a cycle where I use, I recycle, I basically put back. And to be honest, it's the nice concept where we can take something from nature and we can give it back so we can reuse it again and again.
Yeah, brilliant. Okay, I think we've got time for maybe one more question if we have another question. Excellent. So how much cheaper is the recovery process compared to the current mining process?
That is a very good question, because basically in industry, everything is driven by economics. So for example, for rhenium, because it's so expensive, then yes, you could actually get this profitable, and then you can actually use it. For other elements, we depend very much on the market. So let's say that vanadium is a very clear example. We could actually design a material for vanadium. It could be profitable basically now, but by the time we design the material, we can actually implement the industrial application. If the price drops, it might not be viable, and that happens with many things. So actually, we need to study metal by metal and element by element to actually see which ones are best for this technology.
Okay, brilliant. Well, thank you very much, Jose, and thank you everyone for asking your questions. So what I'd like to do now is bring our second speaker, Bonaventura Majolo, in, and we're going to have a little chat about creative reactions. Hi, Bino.
Hello, everybody.
Bino is, just a quick introduction to Bino. Bino is in the School of Psychology with me at the University of Lincoln, and is actually, as well as an expert in human psychology, is also an expert in animal behavior and works a lot with Barbary macaque monkeys. So that will become relevant as we discuss the artworks. So you've both been involved in creative reactions. So creative reactions is a Pint of Science, for those people who don't know, it's a Pint of Science initiative linking up artists with our scientists and creating pieces of art that are inspired by the science. So you can see all of the artworks that have been created by our students in Lincoln, our art students, at creativereactions.blogs.lincoln.ac.uk. We'll post that link in the chat so that you can see it, but it's creativereactions.blogs.lincoln.ac.uk. So I'd just like to ask you both sort of what your experience of working with an artist is. So starting with you, Jose, who's the artist that you've been working with, and what is
Yeah, I mean, it's she's called Samantha Salisbury, and she's a very talented first-year art student. And we are basically creating a very unique piece of artwork. So do you want me to explain a little bit more about it? Or?
Yes, please tell us.
Yes, okay. Sorry, it's basically it's called Tin Heart, and then what we are, I mean, it was her idea. I mean, we had like some designs, and we are creating a car, a metal car, that actually is all made by recycled metal. So actually, she's been actually grabbing everything and actually building a very nice piece that hopefully in June everybody will be able to appreciate in Lincoln. So.
Awesome, that sounds brilliant. And same question to you, Bino. Who's your artist and what have they created?
I work with Rebecca Jarman, and she's an art student, and she produced a series of digitally drawn images called Resource Wars. And these images represent Barbary macaques, so the species that I work with, dressed with military helmet and boots, representing not just the competition that macaques face with other individuals of their own species, but also the competition for land that they have with humans, because macaques are endangered, and so there's a constant fight for areas in which they can live, and the images represent this type of competition.
Oh, that sounds excellent. So, Bino, how did you find the process of working with an artist? Have you ever done anything like that before?
No, this is the first time, and I really enjoyed it. And Rebecca was really doing a great job, and so lots of ideas. Probably she could have produced many more artworks, but this one is really, really nice.
Awesome. And same question to you, Jose. Had you done anything like this before, and how did you find the process?
It's my first time, and actually it's quite enjoyable, because it's like when you're talking to someone who's got a different brain in terms of the way she sees things. So it's like exchanging ideas, how people could perceive this, and what I'm doing, how she sees it, and basically the creation and the process, the creative process in these conversations we have been having. So.
And has that creative process then made you look at your own research area any differently?
Yeah, I mean, because the thing is I know that with scientists, basically, sometimes they say, oh, we live in our ivory towers, and we are basically weird people that actually only cares about like geeky stuff and things like that. But then it's when you're interacting with someone else, and then she understands why this is important for the environment, and then she really loves the environment, and so actually, it's almost like when we talk, and then she tells me what she perceives. It's very interesting because I can see that sometimes we don't connect, or scientists don't connect with the general public, especially with artists. So that's showing, basically teaching me quite a lot about human nature and how other people perceive our work.
Brilliant. It really, your enthusiasm is coming across. It really seems that you've enjoyed this, Jose. So, Bino, finally, if I can just ask you, what are you hoping that people will get out of seeing your research interpreted this way through art?
Well, I think awareness on the challenges that these species face. Unfortunately, the vast majority of animals and primates, so the group of animals that include humans and monkeys, are endangered, and so they face lots of ecological competition. And I won't talk about that in my talk, but these species are endangered, and so any opportunity that we have to raise awareness on the importance of protecting these species is really valuable.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. Well, we'll say goodbye to you just now, Jose. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
And so, Bino, it's my pleasure to introduce you, and I will just let you take it away and begin your talk now.
All right. Thank you very much. So I'm going to talk about resource, social inequality, and war today. And the first thing that I'm going to address in relation to this topic is the ecology of competition. So what environmental conditions favor the occurrence of competition, which in its extreme form becomes violent and can be described by warfare in modern state, by modern state warfare. In evolutionary biology and in socioecology, so the study of how the environment interact with social forces like group size, there are three main factors that are affecting the occurrence of warfare and competition. The first one is that usually competition occurs over valuable resources. So I wrote here food or water, but based on what Jose was talking about, another potential cause of competition could be mobile phones, considering the amount of gold that they have in there. So any valuable resource that has effect on our well-being, on our survival, is potentially valuable enough for us to compete. Although clearly the value that we put on each type of resources may change depending on the individual. So for me, chocolate may be very valuable. Maybe for some of you who don't like chocolate, it's not particularly valuable and not worth fighting. Another factor clearly that affects competition is the amount of resource available. If resources are plentiful, then there is no issue, there is no problem in accessing those resources. We can all be happy, it's all good. But with the majority of these resources, and increasingly so on our planet with the massive population growth that we have seen in our species in the last few centuries and decades, then resources are limited. There isn't enough amount of water, enough clean water or food available for all of us. And so sometimes it's unavoidable to compete because the only way to access and potentially monopolize these valuable resources is through some form of competition. And finally, and very importantly, especially from an evolutionary biology point of view, where I come from, is an analysis of the cost and benefits of competition. In theory, we should engage in competition and in fighting only when the potential benefits of winning a fight are outweighing the potential cost, and we consider that we have a good chance to win. Now, there's a problem here that I cannot discuss in great detail about the fact that human beings very often are overconfident about their capacity to win fights, and we are not particularly good at understanding and judging and assessing the long-term cost and benefits of competition. So, which ends up in the fact that we tend to engage in warfare, as we have seen historically, and in competition much more frequently than what we should do, depending on simply a cost and benefit analysis. Now, we have two main types of competition. And the first one, which we call scramble or indirect competition, as you can guess from the term, doesn't necessarily involve any aggressive confrontation between competing individuals. An example of this is what we observe every day in a supermarket, or if you go to a bakery. They produce a given amount of fresh bread each day. If you go early in the morning, you are more likely to find all the fresh bread that you want. If you go at the end of the day, it's more likely that all the fresh bread is gone, or there is only a small amount of bread available. So we are all competing for the same resource, but we are not aggressively interacting with one another. This is a very subtle form of competition that occurs pretty much at every level and for almost any valuable resource that we have on the planet. But the most evident, if you like, or the ones that has more dramatic consequences, at least on the short term, in terms of, for example, lethal violence, is what we call contest or direct competition. And this is a situation where there is aggression and violence involved because trying to aggressively monopolize resources at the expenses of other individuals may be beneficial. And even the cost of engaging in aggression are potentially high, injuries and sometimes even death in warfare. The benefits may outweigh the potential costs. As I mentioned earlier, the value of the resource very much depends on the local ecological conditions and on what value we put on these resources. So in the extract from the Australian paper that I have on the slide, the fight was actually over rolling paper at the very beginning of the pandemic. So you think, okay, rolling paper, not very valuable, but at the start of the pandemic, it was quite a rare commodity. And so customers were ready to fight in order to have access to these resources. So what we can say basically from here is that competition may be beneficial, of course, for the winner of the competition and of the fight, and it's particularly likely to occur when the benefits outweigh the potential cost. And we have seen this in many, if we analyze warfare in the past or in the recent past, we know that warfare may be beneficial. The war in Iraq and in Kuwait, for example, it's possible that the US, Great Britain, and other allied countries wanted to focus on exporting democracy, but it's equally likely that they were quite interested in monopolizing and having access to sources of petrol. And it's also good for business, as is represented, described very nicely by King here, for example, for companies that sell weapons. But there is a major problem when we focus on warfare, and particularly in technologically advanced modern warfare, in that the cost and benefits of warfare, and not just the cost, so for the countries that lose the fight, but also the benefits, are very often not equally distributed among soldiers or among the individuals taking part in the fight. So even if one party wins the fight, not all the individuals who have contributed winning this war will gain some benefits. And there is growing inequality in the distribution of the resources that have been acquired by the winning party. Of course, the consequences are even worse for the party or the country that loses the fight. So there is a big argument about the inequality in the distribution of resources in warfare conditions, but also outside warfare conditions, anytime that we are competing for resources. A very nice example of the how the cost and benefits of warfare are allocated differently to different individuals can be done by looking at data on the cost and benefits of warfare in warfare in ancient Rome and in modern technologically advanced warfare, in this particular case, the Vietnam War. The comparison is very interesting because we have very good accounts of warfare from the Roman Republic and the Roman Empire. So we know quite a lot about the distribution of resources and the consequences of war. So you can see back from the first comparison between ancient Rome and USA that the wealth inequality was significantly more reduced in ancient Rome, in the Rome Republic in 250 before Christ, than in 2000, in a survey in 2000. The richest 1% of the population was 200 times more wealthy than the average citizen in US, compared to only 10-20% in average Roman citizen. The other consequence of this inequality is that in modern state warfare, the leaders and the wealthier portion of the population very rarely face significant costs. So they very rarely die in battle. They very rarely have financial losses because of a fight. While in ancient Rome, the opposite was true. And if we look, for example, at the Battle of Cannae, where 20% of the Roman army was destroyed by Hannibal, then we know from these historical records that around 30% of the commanders died in battle. So a much higher proportion in comparison to the 20% chance to die simply by random opportunity to die. While the exact opposite is true for the Vietnam War, where the African-American ethnic minority face significant higher risk of death than white Americans. So this social inequality in the distribution of resources is a problem not just for warfare, because clearly soldiers are much more likely to take part in battle if they know that they face high risk but not high benefits. But it's much more likely to occur also in other situations. We end up, if there is social inequality in the distribution of resources, we end up in a continuous state of warfare between countries that is very dangerous. It's very dangerous because it leads to what we call an arms race, which I think is very nicely described by this cartoon here. If countries are constantly fighting over resources, and I'm talking about countries, but it applies to anything, to any parties that are involved in some form of competition that involves potential violence, then, and because of our increased technological power to produce weapons that are very powerful and very effective at do what they are expected to do, kill enemies, then we end up in a situation in which there is a crescendo of risk of death for yourself from the weapons that are thrown at you from your enemies, but also for your own weapons. Because when it comes to nuclear weapons, even if we employ nuclear weapons against our enemies, we pay the consequences of this, because clearly there are massive consequences on our planet, and then we pay these costs in terms of pollution and so on. So let's say the positive aspect of this, and I'm going to close, is that in a situation in which we end up in an arms race, then there is a greater motivation to settle conflicts in a peaceful way, as it was done by Ronald Reagan and Michael Gorbachev when they signed the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty to stop the production of nuclear weapons, because the risk of warfare is so high that it's probably not worth taking. And with this, I thank you very much, and I'm very happy to take questions. Thank you.
That's brilliant. Thanks so much, Pino. Again, I'd like to just hog the airtime and ask a question myself first, if that's okay. Yep. I was thinking about the sort of cost-benefit matrix, and when we think about modern warfare now, I mean, I think about drone warfare, and so there, the risk to the person operating the drone is much reduced simply because they're so much farther away. So is that the kind of thing, or is this all Is it all changing really quite rapidly as technology changes then?
Absolutely, yes. There are two major problems, as you correctly say. The first problem is that clearly, if I am firing missiles, so I'm using a drone to strike, to run a strike against my enemy, I have very low costs and potential significant gains. So I may be more motivated to fight. So there is a growing risk of escalating warfare and conflict. The second problem is that close combat, usually humans have significant constraint against killing other conspecifics, other humans. And people in the army, from what I understand, say that there is a significant amount of training that is required for soldiers to overcome these innate constraints over fighting. But when you are shooting your enemies from a distance, this type of constraint is significantly reduced. So you are much more likely to inflict damages to the opposing side without really caring of that. So the whole situation, the whole advantages that we have with technologies are very dangerous in terms of risk of escalating conflicts.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So do we have some questions from some of our viewers then that we can have a look at? So Adam's saying, do you agree that violence is reducing over time, as Steven Pinker argues, or will competition for resources reverse this trend?
That's a very nice question, and there is I'm a little bit laughing about that, because there is you went right to the center of a big debate at the moment between people like me interested in warfare and competition. It's very difficult to say. I think there's an argument for in support of the fact that we were very violent in our evolutionary past and in our prehistoric time, and we are significantly more peaceful now. And I think overall there is probably a lower amount of conflict occurring on the whole planet, although in some spots there is warfare almost on a continuous basis. But at the same time, the amount of damage that we can do with these more advanced weapons is significantly greater than in the past. So the consequence, not just in terms of deaths, but also in terms of the financial consequences, are significantly higher. Then the debate, of course, there are researchers, for example, that say that some of the evidence brought from Steven Pinker is not completely reliable. So there is quite a lot of discussion over this point.
So Adam's waded right into the center of that debate there.
Yes.
Patrick, kind of, I guess, related to what you were just saying there and related to what I asked, with the advances in technology and the ability of machines to fight our wars for us, do you think this will lead to more war?
Potentially, yes, because I think one of the fact that we can wage war from very distant, then it makes us less likely to fully appreciate and understand the terrible consequences of war. At the same time, I want to be optimistic, and I want to think that we are going in a direction, hopefully, where we see that we are on the same planet and there is only one planet, and we have to grow a sense of community that allow us to settle conflicts in a peaceful way, because the consequences of these conflicts are going to be devastating for all of us. Albert Einstein wrote, it's a famous quote, that he didn't know what weapons would be used in the Third World War, but he knew that the Fourth World War would be fought with the sticks and other basic weapons, because civilization as we know it would be completely destroyed by a Third World War.
Yeah, good point. Okay, I think we've got time for one more question before we wrap up. So Paul's saying modern warfare is increasingly moving into the digital world, with governments targeting electronic infrastructure. How do you see this affecting people in the countries targeted?
Ed, this is a fantastic question, and it opens a completely new area of research, because it's indeed true that you can now wage war without actually directly employing or displaying any physical aggression. And it is very dangerous, of course. It goes, I guess, a little bit too far away from my comfort zone in terms of expertise. But I would say that it falls again in this area where you can potentially wage and strike your competitor or enemy very violently without fully realizing the consequences of this for our everyday life and our well-being. So it's definitely an area to monitor, and probably to monitor increasingly so and very fast, because it's potentially very dangerous.
Yeah.
Perhaps even more dangerous than traditional warfare.
Yeah, I think we're seeing a lot of, increasing numbers of electronic attacks, and particularly targeting things like biometric data, which is a bit worrying as well, isn't it?
Yes.
Okay, excellent. Thank you very much, Bino. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you all for listening. Thank you.
Thank you, Bino. So that's it from us. If I could ask you to have a look underneath the description box for tonight's event, you'll find a feedback form. We'd really like to hear your feedback. And if you do fill in that feedback form before the end of June, you'll be in with a chance of winning a prize. So thank you very much for joining us. Remember, there are lots more shows as part of Pint of Science 2021. You can find details of all the shows at pintofscience.co.uk. I hope some of you will be able to join us again tomorrow, same time, 6 p.m, where we'll be talking about your brain and you, and again at 6 o'clock on Thursday, where we'll be talking about health and society. So that's all from us at Lincoln. Thanks very much for joining us. Bye-bye.